Ladies and gentlemen, this is a new episode of my podcast, Explore and Engage with Anand. In this episode, I'm going to be talking about Georgia. And my friends, I believe that nationwide, Republicans must focus on Georgia. Jon Ossoff is a Democrat U.S. Senator who is up for re-election. And Jon Ossoff must be defeated in November of 2026. I remember clearly when Jon Ossoff was elected to the U.S. Senate. It was a devastating loss for the Republicans. Republican Senator David Perdue faced a major loss. David Perdue was the incumbent U.S. Senator at the time, and then Jon Ossoff captured that U.S. Senate seat. And 2021 was a very difficult year for the Republicans. In the Georgia runoff election, Jon Ossoff was declared the winner. And I still cannot figure out how that happened. How could Jon Ossoff win in a state like Georgia? Georgia is a Republican state. That is my understanding, and I still cannot believe how Jon Ossoff won that election. The results were the following. Ossoff received 50.6% of the votes, and David Perdue received 49.4%. It was a very narrow difference, and even today I find this quite shocking. How did this end up being the result? I don't know. I have many questions in my mind, but let's just move forward and let's look into the future. We're going to talk about the future. Let's talk about the reality that is in front of us right now. And let's talk about the road ahead. 2026, that is next year. This is 2025. 2026 is when Jon Ossoff is up for re-election. And I'm going to be very disappointed if Republicans don't defeat him. If the Republicans fail to defeat Jon Ossoff in 2026, I am going to be very, very disappointed. This is a very easy U.S. Senate seat that we can capture, and we can expand the Senate majority. We have 53 seats in the Senate right now. We, the Republicans, we have 53 seats in the U.S. Senate, and we can expand it to 54 if we win this Georgia Senate seat. By the way, the Ossoff versus Perdue race was not the only loss that we, the Republicans, faced. You will remember, I'm sure, that Raphael Warnock, Democrat, he was also declared the winner in the race against Republican Kelly Loeffler. Okay, so Jon Ossoff versus David Perdue. Ossoff was declared the winner, and then Raphael Warnock, Democrat, versus Republican Kelly Loeffler, and Raphael Warnock was declared the winner. So two major losses that we faced in Georgia. And then in 2022, we had an opportunity to defeat Warnock and to win back that seat. But Herschel Walker, the Republican Senate candidate, did not win against Raphael Warnock. So That was an opportunity that we lost. Okay, it was a big loss for the Republicans in 2022. And now Warnock will be up for re-election in 2028. Okay, so 2026 is what we are talking about right now. 2026 is what we are thinking about right now. And that's why I say that nationwide, Republicans must pay attention to the Georgia U.S. Senate race. It is going to require a collective effort. It is going to require collective effort to defeat this man, Jon Ossoff, Democrat. The Republicans must defeat Jon Ossoff in 2026. We have the opportunity to defeat Ossoff, and it is an opportunity that must not be missed. We must not miss this opportunity, we the Republicans. And let me tell you something about Ossoff. Let me tell you something about this man, U.S. Senator Jon Ossoff. He supports impeaching our president, Donald J. Trump. That is correct. Jon Ossoff, the Georgia Democrat U.S. Senator, supports impeaching our great president, Donald J. Trump. At a time when we are entering the golden age of America, Jon Ossoff supports impeaching the leader who is making the golden age possible. Jon Ossoff must be defeated. This man supports impeaching our president, Donald J. Trump. So 2026, Jon Ossoff must be defeated. And let me also tell you that it seems like Ossoff is not a fan of DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency that President Donald J. Trump established. But Jon Ossoff doesn't like DOGE. That's what it seems to me from the news that I've gathered. But it doesn't surprise me. I'm not shocked. Jon Ossoff is a Democrat, and you see that Democrats are against DOGE because DOGE is working hard to make government more efficient by cutting fraud, waste, and abuse, and the Democrats clearly have declared their opposition to DOGE. Democrats don't like DOGE. And so let's talk about Jon Ossoff as we were. Jon Ossoff is someone who is going to continue to be a voice that will oppose the Trump administration. And he's going to try to use his power in the U.S. Senate to block the America First agenda. Jon Ossoff is going to try to use his power in the Senate to block the MAGA agenda. And I just want people to understand the sense of urgency regarding 2026. This is 2025. It is still the month of April. As of the timing of this recording, this is still the month of April in 2025. And 2026 is next year. And the 2026 election is in November. But you know what? Understand the sense of urgency. Especially the Georgia Republicans. Are you listening to me? The Georgia Republicans must work hard. I'm here in Wisconsin, far away from Georgia, but I'm speaking to the Georgia Republicans. I want the Georgia Republicans to understand how important it is to defeat Jon Ossoff in 2026. My friends in Georgia, are you listening to me? My fellow Republicans in Georgia, are you listening to me? Let me tell you more about Jon Ossoff. One might think that Jon Ossoff would be willing to work in a bipartisan fashion because he's a Democrat in a Republican state. But no, this individual does not seem to be someone who is willing to work in a bipartisan fashion. Jon Ossoff seems to be driven by left-wing political motivation to try to obstruct the America First agenda of President Trump and his administration. Do you know what Senator Ossoff said recently? Jon Ossoff thinks that the Trump administration is causing chaos and uncertainty. That is what Jon Ossoff thinks. He thinks that the Trump administration is causing chaos and uncertainty. Chaos and uncertainty, really. In reality, the American people saw chaos and uncertainty when Joe Biden and Kamala Harris were in power. There was high inflation, there was supply chain crisis. People were being laid off, businesses were struggling when the Biden-Harris administration was in power. That's when people were suffering, businesses were struggling. All of these things happened during the Biden-Harris administration. Families suffered, children suffered. The Biden administration, they continued to spread the COVID panic. The Biden administration forced masks and vaccines on the American people. The Biden administration's actions and policies inflicted pain and suffering on the American people. There was chaos, there was uncertainty, and at the time, people wondered, will we ever recover from this? That's what people were thinking at the time. Will we ever recover? And so there was chaos, there was uncertainty during the Biden administration. And finally, the Trump administration came to power and the process of repairing all the damage started. The Trump administration is repairing the damage done by the Biden-Harris administration. And now, this left-wing political figure named Jon Ossoff is accusing the Trump administration of creating chaos and uncertainty. And Jon Ossoff also said that this administration, meaning the Trump administration, needs to define its economic objectives. Okay, my friends, let me tell you what the economic objectives are. Because the economic objectives of the Trump administration are the economic objectives of the American people. We will fight inflation. We will bring back stability in the economy. We will make groceries and gas affordable. We will bring businesses back to the U.S. We will strengthen American manufacturing. We will create opportunities for the people. We will help ensure a bright future for the next generation. We will ensure that seniors have the financial means to enjoy their retirement. We will save Social Security. We will save Medicare. We will make sure that there's no fraud, waste, and abuse in government programs. And these are some of the objectives. We will make government more efficient by cutting fraud, waste, and abuse. And these are some of the objectives, and there's more. So Jon Ossoff, he says that this administration needs to define its economic objectives. Well, the administration has defined its economic objectives. These are the economic objectives of the American people. The American people who overwhelmingly voted for Donald J. Trump. So Jon Ossoff is completely out of touch. And so 2026, all eyes on Georgia. And now the question is, who's going to be running against Jon Ossoff? We need a strong Republican candidate to run against Jon Ossoff for U.S. Senate. So who is it going to be? I don't know. I don't have the answer. Now, some people think that Brian Kemp, the governor of Georgia, Brian Kemp, may run for U.S. Senate. Brian Kemp is the current governor of Georgia, and he is not going to be able to run for re-election as governor because of term limit. And so Brian Kemp could be a strong Senate candidate. And he is someone who has won statewide races in Georgia, so he could easily, I believe, defeat Jon Ossoff. Now, my friends, if you remember, it was years ago that there was tension between President Donald Trump and Governor Brian Kemp. However, those tensions have subsided and the two have come together. So there's unity now. There's unity among Republicans in general. And when you look at President Trump and Governor Kemp, they have come together, the tensions have subsided, and it's a sign of unity. There's unity. In fact, Governor Brian Kemp has been appointed by President Donald Trump to the Bipartisan Council of Governors. It's a council with five Republicans and 5 Democrats. This council, this bipartisan council, works to strengthen state-federal partnerships on key national security issues, military coordination matters, and disaster response. So Brian Kemp is one of 10 governors in the country, 10 governors in the country, the 10 governors who are part of this council. Brian Kemp is one of those 10 governors. And the other governors are Governor Glenn Youngkin, Governor Josh Stein, Governor Ron DeSantis, Governor Jeff Landry, Governor Wes Moore, Governor Gretchen Whitmer, Governor Kathy Hochul, Governor Josh Shapiro, and Governor Henry McMaster. So they are the 9 other governors and then Governor Brian Kemp. And these governors are part of the Bipartisan Council of Governors. Now also, Brian Kemp is the chair of the Republican Governors Association, and he was elected to that position in November of 2024. It's a 1-year term, I believe. And so Brian Kemp is the chair of the Republican Governors Association. So clearly, he is a high-profile political figure. He's a high-profile governor. And if Brian Kemp decides to jump into the Senate race, then it might be very challenging for Jon Ossoff to get reelected. And we want a Republican U.S. Senator. We want a strong Republican Senate candidate who can defeat Jon Ossoff. And so Brian Kemp may be that political figure, may be that candidate. And also keep in mind that if Brian Kemp gets an endorsement from Donald Trump, I think he is going to be unstoppable. And, just look at the past election results from Georgia. In 2018, Brian Kemp received 50.2% of the votes in the gubernatorial election. 50.2% of the votes Brian Kemp received. And Stacey Abrams received 48.8%. Now, I'm sure you remember Stacey Abrams, the Democrat. She received 48.8% of the votes in 2018 when Brian Kemp received more than 50%. And in 2022, Brian Kemp received 53.4% of the votes, and Stacey Abrams, once again, received 45.9%. So the second time, Brian Kemp won by a bigger margin. He defeated Stacey Abrams by a bigger margin in 2022 compared to 2018. And so Brian Kemp can definitely win another statewide race, I believe, if he decides to run for U.S. Senate. And let's not forget 2024, Donald J. Trump won the state of Georgia by receiving 50.7% of the votes. So that makes 2026 even more promising. 2024, President Trump won Georgia by receiving more than 50% of the votes, 50.7% of the votes. And so, as we look at 2026, the Republicans are very, very hopeful about the U.S. Senate race in Georgia. The Republicans have a wonderful opportunity to expand the U.S. Senate majority by defeating Jon Ossoff. And I think Brian Kemp is in an excellent position to win if he chooses to run. And if he gets President Donald Trump's endorsement, then I believe victory will be ours. From 53 seats in the U.S. Senate, we can get to 54, given that we don't lose any Senate seat in any other race, in any other state. And I will talk about the Senate races in other states in the near future. 2026 is something that I'm really laser focused on. And I will talk about the Senate races in other states. So my friends, share with me your thoughts. Let me know what you think about the Senate race that's coming up in Georgia in 2026. If you have thoughts, if you have opinions, if you have comments that you want to share, please go to my website, tausifanam.net. And once you are on my website, you can send me a message. You can also email me. My email address is tausif@tausifanam.net. And you can also find me on social media. You can find me on Facebook. You can find me on Instagram. You can find me on X, and you can also find me on Truth Social. So get in touch with me, my friends. Share with me your thoughts. And I want to thank you all for continuing to listen to my podcast. And I hope to be back again soon with a new episode of Explore and Engage with Anam.